I get asked a lot of questions about guitar pots and different tapers and wiring schemes and all that. And it's a really deep subject. And I've touched on it in some other videos with the 335 rewiring and 50s wiring explained and all that. And there's a great series by A2 Guitars, and there's linked below to the whole playlist for much more in-depth. But I don't think that while he does a great job explaining it and shows very nice visuals, I don't think that the audio recording of his almost 10-year-old videos at 240, 480p really demonstrate that well. So I want to augment that and put in my 2 cents. This is that 68 Tele, and it's got a new volume pot and a tone pot. The stock 250K volume pot started off life as a 10% audio taper, and it had changed to the point where it was about a 2 or 3% audio taper pot. And all the volume change was in this last little bit, right here to here. All huge drop in volume here. And that was not useful, and it was very loose mechanically. So if you're changing the pickup knobs, half the time you would bump that volume, and then it would go down, that little change, you lose all your output level. So that pot is gone, and it now has a 30%, which can also be called a 25% taper pot, often referred to as a J taper. It's what Fender used in the black panel amps for the volume and treble controls. You can see it on the schematic, 30%. It's also marketed by a lot of people as vintage taper. CTS makes the majority of them. Emerson has one as well. I'm not sure if Emerson's made by CTS. The Emerson is a very nice pot, but it's out of stock seemingly everywhere right now, so I didn't go with that. And the Emersons have very low resistance, mechanical resistance, low torque. RS Guitar Works makes one called the Super Pot, which is again a CTS that they have made to their spec with the 30% taper. They seem to no longer be selling the pots individually. You have to buy the entire wiring harness. No, thank you. For me, for others that may be great. Mojotone also has them made by CBS to their spec, which is a 30%, and they're calling theirs the vintage taper. They are out of stock, which leaves right now what's available this week in 2021 to be the standard CTS and the Fender branded CTS, both of which are 30% taper. The Fender has a slightly shorter bushing than the than the CTS, but the Fender is still longer on the bushing. It's 0.31 versus 0.25 compared to a standard one. So I had to use a couple of tooth washers to get the spacing right. But this 250K, 30% audio taper pot gives me the traditional good range of control for a rock, blues, country guitar. It swells nicely. It's a little bit, the knurls on this old knob are almost worn off. It's hard to do that. The knurls are really a problem. But in addition to doing swells, it has a fairly wide range of control. So it's nice. If you want to back off a little bit, you've got a wide margin of subtle controls. If this were a 10% audio taper pot, you would have a much less wide margin. You'd have from here to about here. Remember, in stock form, it's here to here. 10% would be about here to here. This is here to about here. And if this were a linear taper pot, you'd have halfway from here to about, if this were a clock, about 11 o'clock, which is a very wide range of fine control. But below 11 o'clock on a linear taper pot, it would quickly drop off to nothing. So for most rock, country, blues guitarists, I like the 30% audio taper or J taper vintage taper. It gives you a wide range of fine tune, but it drops off fairly quickly to lower volume stuff. If this were playing through a Marshall with the distortion overdrive rather than this deluxe reverb, I might want to roll down to here, which would give me a big loud clean. That would be a big crunchy overdrive, and it's a pretty... Once we address the knurling on this, or the mechanical resistance of the pot, that'll be an easy transition on stage. For someone who does, who just wants it like clean, dirty, real fast, a 10% might be actually better. For someone playing jazz or some other genre where you don't care about the really low volume stuff and you're not doing swells, you just want a really wide range of subtle control. Linear can be better because you have a lot more subtle variations, even though you don't have the real good use of the low volume stuff, because the linear goes from nothing to loud pretty quick. It's like going from here instantly, and there's just nothing in between. So that's why I went with the 30% J taper, vintage taper on the volume. Now on the tone, I went with a 10% because I did not want to have a wide range before I heard any real change. I didn't want a wide range of subtle. I wanted it pretty much immediately to go into roll off as I turn it down. So linear is often recommended to people. I find that a linear tone pot is the worst choice for a tone pot because all the change happens right about here. With a J taper, 30%, all the change would happen from here to about here. With this 10%, all the change happens pretty much, if this were a clock and the sets, the max is at 5 o'clock, you pretty much get change below 3 o'clock. From 3 o'clock down to 7 o'clock, you've got all the change. So and you do have enough fine tuning so you can get real subtle. Like this is a bridge pickup of the 68 Tele. Just roll that ice pick off a bit. So that's why I like a 10% here versus a 30% or, God forbid, a linear. About the only reason that you would want to use a linear tone pot, in my opinion, experience, what you want to call it, is if you never care about any of the in-betweens and you just wanted to really fast go between full bright and just totally rolled off. Almost like an on-off switch. In which case, a linear will have all that, all the tone roll off, fairly bright in a short transition. I prefer the subtle stuff. So the 10% gives me subtle control over tone. The 30% gives me still a subtle range of control, but then the ability to do a big sweep and make a dramatic volume change fairly rapidly if I want to. Now, this particular knob does not sweep very well, and it's for two reasons. Number one, the knurling has almost all worn away. It's almost smooth, and I will talk to the owner. There are repros that have the look of the aged knob, but still have knurling, which gives you a lot more control for pinky swells. That might be a good option, given that this is a player guitar. Or we could get one that looks newer, that matches the chrome here that has not aged much. It's up to him. The other factor is that the pot itself has some mechanical stiffness. And I've already loosened this up a little bit. It was stiffer when it came in. And I'll put a little insert here showing how to loosen the tension on a pot. But I have not done it more than this because I don't know what the owner is going to want. He may not do a lot of pinky swells if he uses a volume pedal all the time, which a lot of guys do. He may want this to be just overall control. And right now, while if it were had better knurling, you could still do the swells, it will stay where you leave it. And before, because it had almost no range of travel before it went drastically quieter, and it was very, very loose, every time you change the pickup selector, you'd end up turning the volume down just a slight bit, but the volume would go away. So I'm gonna leave this here until he gets a chance to play it. If he wants that looser, there are ways to do that, which I will show you. I would, if this were my guitar, I would take these 1968 knobs and put them in a bag and put it in the case and get some knobs that actually you can grip. Because I just can't consistently get that to grab my finger, pull my finger, bump. So let me show you a little insert of how I loosen the tension on pots. And then I'll show you one other thing I get asked about. All right, I want to show you how to adjust the tension on a standard potentiometer like this, so that if you want to have less tension for pinky sweeps, volume swells and stuff, this one's got a good amount of tension. This is the one that was the tone pot in that Tele. It's not a very good pot. It'll be great for this purpose, though, to show this. Inside the pot, there are two little metal flanges that rest against the wiper, which is a conductive path, and I'll take it apart and show that in a little bit. Sometimes you can adjust it externally by just seeing where they are. There's one right there. The wafer's on this side. You can just get in there if you're very careful and kind of push each arm up off the track without disassembling the pot. And this is kind of hard to show on the video actually, but you can kind of, if you have one in front of you, you can see it. Sometimes you can just kind of pry them up away from the wafer, which is this part. And right there, that did help the tension. But the best way to do that, if you're very careful, is to loosen the four prongs, which hold the pot together. All right, then the whole thing comes apart. So here is how the pot's put together. So this is the carbon trace on the wafer. And these are the little metal prongs I'm talking about right here. There's one here, and they press against the wafer. The wafer normally sits like this. And so if you adjust it so they have less tension, and that's just a matter of gently bending the metal down a bit. And you can mess up a pot if you do this and you're not careful. But it's just metal with a little bit of spring tension to it. Most of the time you can do it without messing up a pot. Now that's one part of the puzzle. The other is there's often a bit of grease in these pots. It can be kind of thick. You just honestly, you can just get a little bit of a paper towel and wipe up some. Kind of blot it. Don't do a big wipe. You want to leave some in there. That also adjusts the tension. Now let's put this back together. You get this little opening. That's where the wafer goes. You want to make sure you get that in there. It's got stops in the built into the how it fits in there. That's how you get to each extreme. And you put the wafer back. And there's a little bit of grease there. I'm just going to dab that a little bit. Then you put this back. And then just a matter of bending the flanges back over so that the whole thing clamps together. Now, if you do this to a pot too many times, you can fatigue these metal flanges and they break. So, but the average pot is $3 to $5, so not a huge deal. At that point, it turns a lot more easily. If this had a knob, I could rotate this fairly easily. And I don't have any handy, it's in the other room, but at that point I like to hit it with a bit of deoxit, work that around, and then follow that up with some fader lube. But that's how you adjust tension on a standard pot. This turns a lot more easily now than it did, and you can get in there and really work it so there's almost no tension whatsoever. Sometimes it's best to buy a pot that specifically has low tension. I know Van Halen and Electro-Harmonix market one, and I know the Emersons come that way. And there's variation in the stock tension that pots have. This is a fairly cheap one that was very stiff. Most of the CTS 30% taper ones on the market are pretty darn good. Anyway, that's how you adjust that. All right, in that video on this guitar the other day, some people were surprised that lowering the bridge pickup would actually make the sound brighter. And let me demonstrate that. So here we have, still bright, it's a 68, it's gonna be bright. With a very strong output. If I lower this pickup, it will lower the output, but it will also enhance the high end. So it is very much a balancing act as to the level that you want and the sound that you want. Now, it's all going to depend on the amp you're playing, the speakers, and how you have it set as well. This is a deluxe reverb, treble and bass at noon, into a G12C, which is a fairly classic Fender sound. Hear the next now almost louder than the bridge. Remember that there's a lot more mass vibrating, a lot more on the strings closer to the neck. So there's more signal, if you will, going to the pickup. So even this relatively weak neck pickup just has more energy going to it from the strings here because the strings vibrate less by the bridge. So you need to raise the bridge to get this comparable level. So let me raise that just to get comparable. It's a fun game with these things. No two guitars and no two pickups ever react exactly the same. See, it's kind of where you find the personality of things. That's pretty balanced. Very bright. If I raise that pickup more, I'll do it dramatically. pickup will get louder. It'll also sound more compressed, and we will hear less high end as a result. I don't know whether it's less high end or more mids and lows, which makes us perceive less high end. You gotta be careful not to raise them too much because the magnetic pull can affect the strings. Let me test that. Yeah, see, I'm touching there. So let me lower that a bit. I'm not trying to make a smooth, polished production on YouTube. Just trying to give a demo of some things I get asked about. So here's that bridge now. It's got a lot more output. It's very wiry and mid-range punchy rather than just bright. It's also a lot louder than that neck pickup. Some people will love that. I happen to think that the owner of this guitar, since I know him pretty well, will find that a bit over the top. So let me lower this down so that we're back kind of where we started. But if you're into the Yardbirds era Jeff Beck, I just showed you one of the tricks. All right, that I just eyeballing it from experience. That should still have plenty of punch. I wish I could do all those Roy Buchanan tricks. I've tried reversing the plate and I just can't get good at it. But someone who does that kind of style would like to taper this pot, does that wath. You'll notice that as I roll the volume down, the tone, it doesn't get darker. I didn't put a treble bleed circuit in this guitar. I just connected the tone circuit to the wiper of the volume pot rather than to the input. So we're getting output loading rather than coil loading. The other benefit to this is that I can roll the tone back a little bit at high volume. And as I roll the volume back, it actually gets brighter. It's hard to demonstrate into a clean deluxe without just blasting. But through a Marshall or some other loud, really loud amp, that means that when you're on full volume and you're overdriving the amp, the tones roll back a bit, smooths out. Roll the volume down, the amp cleans up, and the treble comes back. It's almost like when you roll the volume down, you roll the tone back up. It's a nice trick. The deluxe reverb on 3.5 is not the way to show it. All right, just waiting for that new tuner for this guitar, but hope you guys enjoyed this video.